the hybrid work is here to stay. And it is also not only beneficial for the employees' flexibility, but also for the company to actually look at its real estate and see where it needs some optimization. So real estate as essentially is the second largest cost for any business, apart from the payroll coming second. The more you are getting towards the workplace strategy, it's less about the look and feel of the space, but it is a lot more about the numbers, about the decisions being made.
We spend about a third of our lives working, roughly 8 hours each day, if we are fortunate. Yet, the office never sleeps. The physical spaces must be carefully crafted to welcome employees, aiding them in doing their best job. They have long been the symbol of corporate status. However, with real estate being the substantial cost for companies and the workplace forever altered by the pandemic, meticulous planning is more crucial than ever. Meet commercial real estate workplace strategists, the professionals who are dedicated to strategically shaping work environments for optimal productivity, employee satisfaction, and overall business performance. And now, helping companies effectively navigate the hybrid environments. My guest today is Neha Desai, a seasoned workplace strategy professional who has leveraged her degrees in interior design and business administration to assist prominent names in the technology industry in effectively managing the real estate space. Today, we delve into the role of workplace strategy, exploring the responsibilities, work environments, and more importantly, how the evolving work environment is influencing this field. This is Career Calling, and I'm your host, Pratibha Pandit. Hi Neha, welcome to Career Calling.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
This is such a great time to have somebody of your expertise on my podcast, given all the debate about work from home and remote working and all of that. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation today. As always, I start by breaking down from the very basics. You, as a workplace strategist, is a part of a bigger umbrella of commercial real estate, or as it is known in short form, CRE. Let's break it down for the audience. What does CRE encompass? What does that umbrella include?
So essentially, when we looked at real estate, primarily people see real estate as the residential real estate that they're mostly familiar with. But this CRE pretty much encompasses the corporate side of all of the real estate properties. And normally it is including offices, buildings, lands, warehouses, retail as well. So anything that a company owns and operates or leases is a part of the CRE umbrella. And this actually also enables a set of systems and ecosystem that we call the services behind the CRE that has the facilities, the workplace planning, and also certainly IT related. All of those services are considered as a part of CRE as well. So it's the hard side of it, which is the buildings and the land, and then the soft side of it, which is the services.
Mm-hmm. Workplace strategy in itself, where does it fall into? Generally, people are familiar with administrative departments, the facilities in a company. Can you double click a little bit on what is workplace strategy and where does it roll into in an organization?
Normally, workplace strategy is related to any strategy that you would make for utilizing your buildings as well as all your real properties, right? And that usually sits in either a finance department that they roll up under because real estate as essentially is the second largest cost for any business apart from the payroll coming second to the payroll. Sometimes it's a part of facilities, but many times it's also part of human resources because the experience that we provide, it essentially becomes a part of the benefit to the employee who comes on site. And all the expenses such as food, transportation, other benefits such as even massages on site, right? things like that the services are provided are a cost that rolls up under a human resource experience. So normally, and the real estate as such is an organization that functions in tandem to other business partners, such as HR business partners, finance business partners as well. So,
Mhm. As I mentioned earlier, there is so much debate about work from home and remote work. And all the conversations are centered around employee flexibility, right? Employee flexibility, or almost as an employee experience, so to speak. There is very little discussion about all the things that are involved in planning, which is what is your arena. So, can you talk a little bit about what is the impact of all of these evolving workplaces?
certainly. So, as I just alluded earlier, real estate is a big part of the conversation because all the post pandemic era, the hybrid work is here to stay. And it is also not only beneficial for the employees' flexibility, but also for the company to actually look at its real estate and see where it needs some optimization. So that's why, and as we can see that people coming on site, that needs to lead to a larger vision of the company, which means if your company is primarily a manufacturing company, which you cannot do many things remotely. So your on-site culture is pretty much in the DNA. Other companies, which are primarily software companies or have a majority of their working population can work remotely, those discussions can also entail in terms of how are we coming on site, how much are we coming on site, and who is coming on site, depending on the role that they are in or the organization that they are sitting in. And this way, you can actually right size the portfolio. So when I say portfolio, it's the real estate portfolio. Because whenever the person is on site, they're utilizing a certain set of services, right? And that way, the company needs to prepare for the population to come back on site. So that essentially leads to the cost structure. And then if people say they are supporting their offsite culture, there is another set of tools that you provide for helping the team be successful when they are working from home. So that's where the company's business strategy would help drive the real estate strategy. And I like to call it intentionally on site. So that's my favorite term. Even in my teams, whenever we would come back on site during these last few months, it was pretty much with an intention that we need to achieve this when we are on site, because there is a part of our roles where we come and collaborate and we truly knock out a lot of brainstorming in that solid session when we are being there in person. But then at the end of it, you take away action items, which you just need some heads down time so that you can focus and get it done with. And that way, at that point of time, you can choose either to be on site and utilize the available spaces to do your best work, or you take things at home, and that way you can have that flexibility. People work differently. Sometimes they work really early or really late, depending on their family commitments. That way, there is that sense of control of when I can do my best work and where I can do my best work. That directly impacts the real estate and the services that we provide, right? So that's how I find this hybrid culture. There is an opportunity for companies to really see what is it their true DNA is and where is it that they want to make the difference in their employees' lives, right? It directly also affects talent acquisition as well as retention, because people now, whenever you have that opportunity to interview, there is a question that comes up pretty often from the candidate that what is the on-site culture? What is the availability for that flexible hours so that I can still keep my commitments to my family, right? So that's where it is a larger discussion where HR is involved as well as the real estate. And then it affects the finance of the teams, right?
As a workplace strategist, Are you also involved in the planning of the workplace? The space is already available, or does it also start from the beginning of even purchasing and managing of those? Can you throw a little bit of light into that?
Sure. So workplace strategy essentially starts from the beginning when there is a decision or discussion being made on how something new is coming or affecting the company, whether they are growing or resizing or expanding in different markets. The discussions can start from the business saying, hey, we have an acquisition coming up, or we have our competitive advantage would be to be in certain markets. So at that point, we would start looking at from a ground up construction or buying or leasing an existing space, or even figuring out what existing properties we may have and how we could morph it to meet those new demands. So it could go from either ground up construction or taking on what is available readily and then designing it, the interiors to fit the needs. Either way, depending on how fast you want the results to be and what that circle turnaround time you want.
In cases of, there are many, at least in the technology space, there are many companies who have gone fully remote. In that scenario, what is the role of a workplace strategist?
Normally, when that fully remote organization has still on site demands when there are events, as well as specific, say, quarterly events or the need to bring people together. At that time, the real estate teams work with the event management team or marketing team to figure out what that on site presence and interaction looks like. But at that time, certainly there is a change in the service model of the real estate industry. As you may have known, the very well known WeWork, that sort of model for just renting the real estate just in time for the need that you have, that sort of a discussion then comes into play where a real estate team would get involved, have those short term contracts, have those just in time leasing, or just purely renting the space for events. That could be the new role of the real estate strategist. But otherwise, in mostly remote conditions, there is very little fixed cost or commitments. The support that the facilities need to require on site is very minimal at that.
What are some of the work settings where workplace strategists are employed in, where do they work in? Can you share a little bit about that?
Sure. So the companies usually own real estate or own or lease, and that's where the cost is. And then the services when they provide, sometimes it's a service provider company or it's an in-house team that services the company, such as keeping the lights on and keep the water running. Those types of services, say when the companies grow for say about 150-ish headcount, then it makes sense to have those dedicated outsourced vendors to be hired. So that way it doesn't take away the company's resources from their core business to actually just servicing the company, right? At that time, there are the two parts of the solution is clients where they are in-house, where the teams are pretty much directly reporting in that company. And the other part is the service provider industry, which is everybody who works pretty much is the subject matter expert for that team or for that role that they are in. And certain companies say, for example, the different work streams that you may have is the facilities, for example. Facilities is very much part of the bigger strategy as to how much of the services that you provide. And then the other part is the strategy, which is the planning and execution of once the strategy is done, how much of that is being executed. And that all of that can become either a service provider work or could be kept in-house depending on that. And I would say as a thumb rule, the more strategic the conversations are, they usually are kept in-house because that's where some of the confidential discussions are happening as well. But then once the strategy or that execution is ready, that's when they hand it off to a service provider, and then the service provider teams can come in and then execute on the strategy. That's how the two sides.
The vendors list or the type of companies where the services are provided Are they typically corporations or there are other types of organizations? For example, do you also provide services to hospitals, for example, which could be a very different setup?
Yes. Coming back to the corporate real estate, any type of a corporation, and hospital is a corporation essentially. Our government is a corporation, right? So any sort of industry vertical, such as hospitality, hotel business, right? All of them have any sort of a built environment that becomes a potential CRE. And the services that would be provided for these different industries are industry specific. For example, hospitals run 24/7. They have a very high ability to have that urgent care needs to be able to respond quickly. If something is out, you cannot sit on it for more than few minutes because there is life and death literally online, right? So that the different industries pose different challenges, and then that also means that you need to have the service professionals who start becoming more subject matter experts in those industries. As Silicon Valley is pretty much the bread and butter, ends up becoming the technology services and at some point even biotech, that there is that professionals who have that background in biotech geared towards more of the biotech industry services. And then people who have that exposure to the technology field, they end up working more in the technology. But then it doesn't mean that you cannot switch over. It just means that you learn. It's a continuous learning.
Yeah, makes sense. What would be a typical day of in life of a workplace strategist? I use day broadly, but typical work
But
involves the nature of work in your profession.
the part of workplace strategy is, as you can see, the discussions would happen a lot with the clients. So you would have a lot of your pretty much the calendars are filled with meeting with the clients, being on site to actually understand what the on site situation is, or even meeting with subject matter experts who are involved in that decision making. And then at the other part of it is the heads down work when you are really trying to analyze the data, understand the problem, find scenarios, figure out where the opportunities are to actually take the solution to that next level, but also pose other questions that the clients may not have understood or learned or have thought about it. So there is that heads down time that you can manage on your own, but also there is a lot of commitment to be on site in person to have those relationships so that you can build that trust with the client. Because when I say client, I use the word loosely because, say, for a service provider, which is the outside consultant helping the company, that they are using the client as a term for the client that have hired them. But if you are in-house, the real estate organization's client is the business unit, which is essentially the need why the real estate is being looked at. So all the different business units, they are pretty much focused on either providing and refining or innovating the product or a service. And their needs are the business needs that help. So that's where the demand comes from. So if you are in house, you are meeting with the VPs of the business units or the executive committees of the companies that where the decisions are being made. So the meeting, there's a lot of weightage given to that. But then also there is a big part of the analysis that you have to sit down, just really take in what is the demand, what is the solution option, and what is the most effective way to service that market, right? So that's how there is that half and half. I also say portion of it is now also being dedicated to training. So we do a lot of learning on site and online because of the new way of working is posing those new challenges of understanding how is the new world work. And the other part is the data that we actually collect at times to understand and help define that solution even better. So there's that activity based work, meetings, heads down work, analysis, and then of course, learning.
About data, let's get into that. What is the importance of data? What does the type of data that you're looking into, and how do you see this changing your line in the current
Certainly.
times? Mhm.
Certainly. As two parts of the problem is what is available data and what is the unavailable data. So we need the data, but there isn't much there because this culture of data is only coming in focus since people are now realizing that we cannot make decisions in vacuum. Post pandemic, we have seen every company, every organization has a different work culture. And you would not understand that unless you have that data. And the part of the data that we collect or we understand, which is very much in focus, is, I would say, the demand and the supply. So when I say demand, it is the people, the needs, the services that the businesses are requiring. They figure out, okay, this is where we are going. This is the strategy in terms of where the business is going. So that's the demand that is created for real estate. Then the supply part of it. Supply is how many buildings do we have? The sheer facts and figures of this is the square foot we have. This is the number of people that we will need to fit in. This is the number of seats we have. The type of workspaces, such as labs, offices, dedicated spaces, meeting spaces, cafeterias, other support spaces. That facts are which end up becoming the supply of the equation. So when we say demand and supply, we are constantly looking at not only the midterm or short-term supply and demand, but also a 3 or 5 year or 10-year out supply and the demand that we would also need to extrapolate so that we can be prepared whenever that need comes in. So that's where the work is very much about numbers at that point. How are we understanding our population is the data, which is the HR data, the number of people, the type of work that they do, the different roles that they have. That's data. And then the supply part of it is where we are looking at how many seats we have, what is the total number of vacancies, so that we know can we reuse these vacancies and support the demand readily, or do we need to go out and build, and which is a longer commitment and a lot more cost, right? So that's why this data comes from these places. But the other part of the soft data that we see is the utilization. So when people are coming on site, how are they using the spaces? Not only how are they using, just it's not a 0-1. It's not like either you're on site or off site. It is when you're on site, what activities are you actually involved in? When you come on site, are you using certain types of spaces more? If there is a need of a new type of space, is it readily available? Can you morph the existing spaces into new spaces? That data is also something that we need to collect. And then, of course, making decisions around occupancy, vacancy. Are we actually going to need to optimize our real estate? Comes from badge in data. So when you badge in, that's the data. As much as people feel concerned about, okay, there's data, somebody's watching over me or a big brother going to question me. It's not that. It is very clear, and it is the mandate and the ethical mandates for any data analyst is that you aggregate the data at a level that makes sense, but also the data is there to help you make intelligent decisions. It is not to come after you, right? So that's where the difference comes in. So you use the data and use it for what is needed, and you only use the data that is needed. You just don't misuse or extrapolate the data for the reason that you're not intended to, right? So that's where utilization data comes in, the show up rates come in, the type of activities, observation data comes in. And then, of course, the supply and the demand, which is the headcount data, the type of population metrics, and then the space metrics and space type data that comes in. So there's a lot of different data feeding, and then we just assimilate and start making solutions. So
Very fascinating. Very
Mhm.
fascinating as an employee. So things that we probably do not pay attention to most
Yeah.
often. But one follow-up question I had about general nature of the work, does it change based on the stage of the real estate planning? Like if it is something that you are building out new versus once everything is set up in a company, does it change? One. Two, is it common then at different stages for you to move on from one client to the other?
It certainly does. So the stages change because remember, we were talking about the strategy and then the execution. So depending on where that stage is of your conversation with the client, that's the type of work that it would bring out. So if you're in the strategic mode, you're doing a lot of analysis with the data available, with the information that is given by the businesses. And then once you have the strategy baked in as to this is where the outcome needs to be, then the execution data comes into play. So really honing in how many people, where, what, which building, which floor, which area of the floor, what are they exactly going to need? For example, if a building or a team is moving from point A to point B, is the point B prepared and set for receiving this team? Depending on not only how many exactly the assigned or the workspaces are, but also other supporting ancillary spaces are for that team's need. For example, if the scientists are moving from place A to place B, are there labs close by? Same with engineers. Are there labs close by? Or even other teams that are, say, a catering team moves, is there food storage close by, right? That sort of that ancillary support also that you need to start figuring out at that level of how are we going to provide them the spaces that they need. So the strategy is given, right? Okay, we need to move from this place to this place. Now what? Now the next stage is really figuring out the devil's in the details or the God is in the details, where you start looking at it. How are we going to make the person who is moving at that person level very comfortable and productive? That's at the end of the day, we need to provide them the experience that is going to make them thrive in their new space, right? So that's the type of work that happens, is either you're looking at a really macro level or at a very individual level where, okay, me, Neha, is moving from point A to point B. Who is she? What does she need? How can she be the best in when she is on site? Right? So that's where the type of work changes. You may see the different words used as, so the strategy is called the workplace strategy, but then at some point, trying to figure out the actual plan and the scenarios is called occupancy planning. And then after that, people who actually support the move, say they deliver the boxes, they make sure that your IT infrastructure is ready in the new location. You're taking all your tools with you. Are you being packed with least disruption, right? That team is called Moves, Adds, and Changes, MAC. You may hear the word MAC quite a bit as well. So different teams come in and help you with the move or help you with the strategy. So that's where you'll see different roles come into play as well. So and depending on the stage you're at and depending on the work you're supporting, the work changes accordingly.
Yeah, makes sense. One of the common questions always for any profession online, if you see, is how do I break into this field, right? We'll get to that, but I want to first hear your journey. How did you find this? How did you decide that this is the career that I want? And how did you realize?
Certainly, there is a gap in education versus the actual profession, which nobody goes in school to say, okay, I'm going to go work in corporate, because interior design as an education is where we start. We normally would have that entry where we're looking at, hey, I'm going to be an interior architect or interior designer or an architect. Similar to what I did was I had my degrees in India. And when I came here, I started a bachelor's here as well, at University of Cincinnati, which I have such high regards for, that there is a robust program around understanding workplace strategy and programming. So when we say programming is anytime you start collecting information in a very formal way from the client, and it is organized in a way that it will lead to solutions, that process is called programming. And that is where really drew me into understanding, like, okay, this really resonated with me. So that's when I started noticing more as to where is it that I can utilize this newfound love more so in my practice. And then when I started my work, so our degree program had a co-op part of it. So co-op is different from internship. Internships usually is either in summers only or at the end of your actual degree, right? This is intermittent. So alternate quarter, you go in the office and you work. This is a quarter for work, quarter for studying, and then a quarter for work. That's how the program is set up. In that program, I worked for a company that was designing legal offices. And for lawyers' offices, there is this certain understanding of, okay, there's a set of ratios that you use. For so many lawyers would need so many paralegals. And that's where the whole office culture and understanding of how programming would work. So that really got me into more of that learning of how programming works. And that corporate understanding of how the layouts work came from that work. And I really have such regards for my senior at that time. They took time to actually sit me down and explain, this is how we want to go from point A to point B. And this is what it would take. And then once I started practicing it, it came to me naturally after that. So learning through the work, and also finding opportunities to be able to be a part of the projects that involve that conversation is where you break into this. Because there is, again, interior design is very much geared towards furniture finishes and culture that is really related to going in after everything is set up. So you're making those furniture decisions, you're making those decisions around how to beautify the space, right? But this comes a step before that. And getting into the process from that point onwards is where you will be able to start getting an understanding of how are you defining the spaces, how are you laying out the spaces, and why are you laying out the spaces with the way they are going to be. So my journey was very much like that. So when I was working in the studio environment, I got to work on these office spaces. And because of that, the recruiter sorted me out, and then they gave me this opportunity to work for a company, a service provider, working for a technology company, and both were mammoths. So I got exposed very early on to how the real estate team are making an impact on workplace and the careers that we built for not only our clients, but for ourselves as well. So the difference between working for service provider and in-house is when you are in a service provider field, there is a lot of reliance on the training and peer learning, and you have a lot more of you in a similar field that are working for different clients. So you learn from different clients, from your peers. And then when you go to as a growth, you go in-house, now you are exposed to strategy, right? So then that's where you are starting to learn a lot more around how does the business impact the real estate, and how can we help the businesses work correctly, right? So that's where in-house my career went from starting out in the CRE part of it through co-op, and then working for a service provider, working in-house teams. And also at that point, the career evolves such that then you decide one resonates more than the other, or sometimes you just say, okay, certain times, certain years in service provider field can get you to that next level of learning and training, and then you implement it how I followed this was my path, but there may be other paths as well that people get that exposure to breaking into this field as well. I would also say that education played a big role, because not only having degrees in interior design, architecture helped me understand overall what am I wanting the person who inhabits the space feel, but the actual impact when it comes to finance, when it comes to HR, that came from my business degree. So when I went for my master's in Santa Clara University, the understanding of business really helped me hone into why the VPs are making these decisions and what are the other factors, such as competitive advantage of being in a downtown location versus a suburban location, the hiring and retention advantage of being in a suburban location or being in a college town where you can truly attract the talent. That's where the decisions were made at a business level, which were directly impacting the real estate. That's when you're starting to open up your understanding of, okay, this knowledge base is just one factor, but there are these other contextual factors that enhance and work as one company, right? So I would say learning through your experiences in different fields, such as being in a part of the service provider industry or an in-house industry, but also understanding that formal education can also take you to that next level. Sure.
Amazing. One follow-up question there. Did you stumble upon the workplace strategy or a CRE as a field during your education? Is that even a topic that is introduced there, or is it something that you found when you started doing these co-ops?
There is one subject that takes you there. So at least in the degree that I had, that one of the subjects was workplace strategy programming, but that is just one of the subjects. But when you actually start using it, was primarily into when you went into the industry and started working for the field. Here's the other thing that I would also highly recommend for anybody who is trying to figure out whether it is right for them or not. Understand what they like, in the sense where they are normally geared towards. Is it very creative side of the field or analytical side of the field? Because the more you are getting towards the workplace strategy, it's less about the look and feel of the space, but it is a lot more about the numbers, about the decisions being made are very much around finance and the HR driven, and then the data driven, right? What is the data telling you? What is the need of the space? What is the business need? So it is very practical at that point rather than the look and feel that comes after. If you are geared towards a lot more creativity, there is that field as well. But just knowing where your natural tendencies are will help you gain that next step. Also, early on, which really helped me, is trying different co-ops in different industries. So I have worked in hospitality, designing hotels. I have also worked in the healthcare, which is designing hospitals. So primarily working in these different verticals will also get you some natural affiliations around, oh, I really like this, or I can do it, but it didn't excite me when I woke up. So that's where you start knowing and then fine tuning what really works for you. And then at some point you just know, this is it. This is for me. So
You mentioned about interior design and architectures as some of the educational paths. Are there any other educational paths that can lead you to this profession?
there are many certifications as well that are available, and also just getting exposed to very different lateral fields as well. So for example, if you look at it as, say, I'm a part of space planning right now, but if I try out the Mac piece of it, then it gives me that exposure to, okay, this is how this team works. And then you also start with occupancy planning, right? So these are these lateral fields that you can get exposure to start looking for what really resonates best for you. So working in, say, facilities team, working in Mac, working in other IT, for example, or currently new technologies that are related to real estate, such as sensors and other furniture designs and so forth. All of these industries have an aspect of workplace strategy, and then you can then fine tune into this field as well.
Lateral moves.
Correct.
Mhm. Is there a licensure requirement in this profession? Usually in architecture and other lines, there is certain type of license is required. Is it required for to be
No,
in this space? No.
no, there is no license required, but to get to this field, your degrees would come in very handy, because that's when you are getting those opportunities to be able to work in this field. Otherwise, it is very hard to have those strategic conversations if you really are not either formally trained or trained on job to understand why the businesses are making these decisions and how you can help with enhancing those. There are other certifications that you could try out, but this is, again, from my understanding, and everybody I have met has had either architecture, interior design degrees, and then have grown more into the workplace strategies portion.
Mhm. Let's talk about the early stages of the career. Other than how to break into the field, typically the conversation I have seen is surrounding around the career path, right? Especially focusing on how does the initial years look like? What do you start out as and how do you grow into this profession?
Sure. Starting out, primarily, if you were a new grad or an intern, you would get that internship through your either internship programs, or you apply for internships when they are available online on the job boards. But also, getting through those lateral moves, you can start learning occupancy planning and space planning. So space planning is all about understanding the actual layout of the space. And there is a lot of on-site work. And that, because this is an on-site, it's real estate is real estate where you have to be on site to understand or design or execute. Real estate teams are usually coming in person, walking the spaces. But more than walking, you start auditing the spaces, which means you actually understand how many of certain types of spaces are available, what's the condition of the space, how are they using it, the utilization of the spaces. So you do a lot of observations and capturing the data. And that makes you starting to be aware of, okay, this is how the spaces are being used. This is what underutilization looks like. This is overutilization looks like. And this, then you start seeing, okay, now if I have to make a perfect solution, how can I mitigate the over and underutilization and make it right size? So then coming on site, learning the field by actually auditing. Site audits are a major part of your learning, and then also apprenticeship, learning from your senior. And I think mentoring is a big part of this profession, where you learn from your mentors. I learned from my mentors quite a bit, and I still do. And there are times when I am in a situation where I'm thinking, okay, how could there be a better solution? Help me challenge myself. Sometimes you're just in your own thought process. Mentors help you challenge to say, okay, have you thought about this? Have you thought about it? Right? So that's your early career. You start looking for mentors that you see as role models. And then you start working with them or finding opportunities to help them by learning on the job. And then sometimes taking on pet projects, such as say, okay, I know that my core job duties is this, but if I were to take on this role, it would help the other person, but also I would learn as a part of the process. And then you want to take on those extra stretch goals or stretch projects, and then start getting yourself exposed to a lot of these conversations. And you start learning through, when you're, I say learning through osmosis at that point. because you're just being exposed and you're in the room when these discussions are being done. And you can take on a simple role such as, okay, I'll help you make the presentations, or I'll help you do the data cleaning, which are very much the time consuming part of the whole profession. But when you take on, as an early career person, take on these roles, you really help the other person, because at that point, they are investing time and you are actually helping them take that grunt work away from that schedule. So that way it frees up the mentor's time to actually help you. So that's how you would want to start associating with your mentors, but also start reading a lot, because you'll see a lot more careers have changed. AI is a big part of this conversation, right? AI is not as fully baked in this profession, and the learning only comes from other professionals who have done and learned their lessons, right? So that learning happens through reading and learning from others who have made mistakes. So it doesn't mean that you only learn from successful professionals, but also, hey, this is what I tried and this is what didn't work, right?
Yeah, absolutely. To get to the higher levels, more strategic levels, how important is to have a business degree like MBA degree like you have? Is that common?
I have seen that the quality of the conversations that happen with a person with a degree that knows what they're talking about, when they know that there is a larger context of the business, right?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
I would say, if you have the ability, say if degree is not on your cards, or if you cannot commit to that, learn why they are doing what they're doing and have that understanding of business. You can learn from YouTube, look at accounting practices, look at finance practices, look at HR practices, understanding where their context is. That either you can take a more formal path, which is the degree, which your MBA gives you, but there are other ways to learn. It's just a longer, I would say, a scenic route, right? So you can take your time, your own path of learning, however you want to. I highly recommend that MBA would also not only get you the confidence and access to understanding why these decisions are being made, but it also opens up at some point workplace strategy, because it is such a cross-functional role. You can open up to other levels of your work as well, right? You can become an expert in change management, for example. You can become an expert in technology implementation, because all of these are very much related to the environment for the employees on it. And then that can come in only because you know what they are talking about and you can learn on the job. It just opens up more opportunities.
Makes sense. Now, regarding opportunities, the general notion, even I would have thought that with the changing way of working, the opportunities for these type of professions or roles might be less. What is your view on that, and how is the current atmosphere impacting your line of work?
I would say, because there are changes happening, the type of work is changing. So the old way of, I would say, occupancy planning is going to be obsolete in a matter of years, which is one-to-one seating. One person comes on site, gets a cubicle, and
Mhm.
uses this set of spaces, and then, repeats. And then the profession at that point was, I wouldn't say easier, but a simpler. It was not as complex. Now the complexity is about the hybrid workspaces, right? The number of people coming on site is different every day. The number of roles have changed. The number of people who come on site and are also having equal presence at home is a challenge, because now you have to understand, when is the peak, when are the ebbs, and also, are you prepared for the peaks? Ebbs, no problem, but you can't have too many prolonged ebbs, because that point you have to start resizing your portfolio or optimizing your portfolio. Because if you're going to sit on empty offices for a long period of time, that is directly affecting company's bottom, right? So understanding your new way of working is posing new opportunities to enhance, to be on site and be of value to the company. I wouldn't say it is gone. If anything, it has become more complex. I also see there is a large untapped part of site audits that is not yet fully developed. I would say previously, site audits were also very simple. You come on site, you look at what is there, you check the boxes, and then you fix the things that you see something's wrong. And so now that site audit actually provides data and creates this system where you can find opportunities and then suggest scenarios where you can use these spaces in a certain way to solve the problems that even the clients didn't think about. So that site audits actually create data. So then that creates the data analytics portion of it, right? So there is before a lot more was about relationships and coming on site and providing the space, one-to-one seating, a lot more stable environment. Now it's all about dynamic environment. Every day the space looks different. Every day my needs are different. I come on site to meet with certain clients on certain days, but then I need some heads down time. How does that work? How does that work if I'm meeting with my own team versus meeting with the client? So then the setups are different. The type of discussions are different. So if I'm brainstorming versus a formal presentation, the type of setups that support every day is different. On certain event days is different. So I would say that the work is changing. It's becoming more complex and it's driven a lot by data. So I would highly recommend for anybody who is starting out in this field, know that you would need your creative as well as analytical sides equally as you start growing in this field. If this is something that resonates with you and you start learning on the job more and it drives you and gives you more energy, then that's what you invest in. If you are more of the creative kind, there is still space for that because then you're working with the furniture dealerships, you're working with the interior design teams, you're working with architects to create the same environment, right? So no matter where your expertise or your liking is, there is a space for you in this field, right? That's how I would put it.
Yeah, it's really very interesting. And thank you for the details there. Finally, Neha, for those who are interested in this field or contemplating, what are some of the resources that you would recommend?
Certainly, researching the colleges that provide interior design. But remember, there are two types of interior design professions where one is BS in interior design and one is BA in interior design. The Bachelor's of Science in interior design has a lot more analytical part of it involved in how they have their curriculum set up. And then BA in interior design, Bachelor's of Arts, where more creative side of the field comes into play. Also, going on site and understanding when you are looking to choose the program, ask those questions. How much of the corporate part of the role are you actually teaching? How much of programming is being taught on site, or how much of that dedicated on-site experience is provided as a part of the curriculum? Is it a co-op program, alternate quarter on-site versus not? Those types of questions will help you choose the right program for you. And then there are certain industry networks. One is called CoreNet, CoreNet. CoreNet is around industry professionals for corporate real estate. They come together regularly, knowledge share. There are resources online that you can go read. They also do a lot of discussions around the new challenges that post-pandemic world brings in, but also new technologies that come into play. You know, the sensors, the other flexible environments that are allowed on site. Those types of discussions happen in those networking events. That also exposes you to other professionals that are in this field and may be willing to take you on as a mentee. So that would be another place where you could start. There is another organization called IFMA. It's around facilities management. And sometimes real estate teams have a major portion of facilities that become the key driver of the strategy as well. IFMA is equally your resource to getting exposure to all of these professionals that are in this field. And there are speaker events. They also share internships, and you also can get those project opportunities that you can work for a short term with them. So these are some few places where a person can start looking into it. So
Amazing. Thank you so much, Neha. This was such an interesting conversation. I learned a lot, something that we all are the beneficiaries, but being completely oblivious to what goes on behind the scenes. So thank you so much for coming on my podcast and sharing your knowledge.
you're very welcome. And I also wanted to offer that if anybody has this interest, certainly feel free to send them my way. I'm more than happy to not only be a short term or a long term resource for them, but also I have benefited a lot from my mentors, and I only hope to pass it forward. So please don't hesitate. If anybody is interested, I'll be happy to guide them.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Have a great day.
This is Career Calling, and I'm your host, Pratibha Pandit. For more contents like this, please don't forget to subscribe, leave a rating, or a comment. Thank you for tuning in.